Here is a custom BMW Trike motorcycle featuring a K100 engine and enough room to accommodate 4 people. But there's a problem. A couple of problems, actually. This motorcycle hasn't seen any action in at least 4 years, and as you can imagine, most of its critical components are in a sorry state. The brake discs are rusty and screaming for a change, the rear axle is off, and the tires are stuck, literally. It's a heck of a job, but in a few seconds from now, you'll watch this skilled restorer from Tim Classics attempt to give it another shot at life. But will he succeed? Scientists say 20% of adults are chronic procrastinators, and Tim is definitely one of them. We all are anyway, but Tim is on a whole different level because think about this for a second. He's had this bike sitting idle in his garage for 2 years, and despite being a pro restorer, he refused to do something about it until now. But you can understand why it took him so long to consider repairing it. I mean, the damage on this thing is far beyond rusty brake discs and jammed tires. The engine is pretty rough, and as you can see, there is a hole in the filter. This corroded stainless steel exhaust definitely needs some attention, and so do the 2 fuel tanks. Yes, this beast has 2 fuel tanks, one in front and another at the rear, but obviously none of them can get the attention they need if they are not disassembled. So Tim placed the bike on 4 axle stands and got down to business with a big smile on his face.
Yeah.
Using a power screwdriver, he unbuckled the 2 rear tires and, in the process, took off the exhaust system too. If you ask me, that exhaust looks too small to handle the powerful roar of a 4-cylinder engine. Luckily, Tim found a larger replacement part that fits just fine. He also ordered a new master cylinder to replace the old mini-clutch cylinder. We're off to a great start here, but there's still a long way ahead in this restoration journey. The gearshift lever is seized up from years of rust. Looks like it's going to need a thorough cleanup and a sufficient dose of grease. Next up, Tim hooks the bike to a battery and surprisingly, a few lights come up. Unfortunately, the second rear skull light didn't turn on, the horn was dead, and the engine refused to start. At first. But when Tim tried to start it a second time, it produced a resounding roaring sound, and he was quite elated. All that excitement faded into thin air as soon as he discovered a fuel leak on the other side. After a few minutes of careful observation, he traced the problem to a split manifold. Bad news. Well, not really. Tim found a matching set of 4 second-hand manifolds on eBay for just £48. And by the time they arrived, they came along with other components. A brand new air filter, 2 freight discs, and a clutch master cylinder. To reach the manifolds, Tim first had to undo the Jubilee clips and disassemble the airbox. Finally, the knackered manifold is out. Since the engine already showed positive signs, Tim figured he might not need to completely disassemble the entire bike to restore it. But some components were far too gone, and the only way to effectively restore them was to detach them first. You could tell Tim was very excited about how lovely the cam covers would look when fully restored. I've never seen a man get so much excitement from just staring at a piece of metal. Shows how much Tim loves his job. He spent a few minutes assessing the cam chain and 4 cylinders on the right side of the K100 engine. He, however, didn't find as much joy dismantling the mudguard, so he decided to cut it off with the grinder. That was a mission and a half, and Tim knew it. Look at him holding it out like a hunter showing off his latest catch. But the job was only half done. Once again, his excitement was on full display, and at this point, it's becoming infectious because I'm super excited about the next phase. First, he sprayed the cam covers with a nice black coat of paint, and right after that, he sanded this whole area to ensure the BMW emblem is visible. It looked really nice in his hands, but guess what? It looked even better on the bike. Now it was time to do a general assessment to see how far the restoration had gone. On this side, the mini cylinder has not been painted yet, and this lever still needs to be greased. Looks like Tim is a bit faster with the restoration on this other side. He's reinstalled the throttle bodies, throttle cable, and a few other cords, except this one which connects to the fuel tank. With that, he concluded the assessment and continued the restoration.
Grease, back brake. Look at that. Woo!
The piston is out and it seems to be in a pretty good condition, but it still needs to be cleaned and repainted. So here's the piston after being cleaned with a wire bush and drill. Now it's time to take off the seal and give the piston a well-deserved paint job. That is absolutely stunning. But of course, it needed a few tweaks here and there to get it over the line. There goes the newly revamped front caliper, looking as clean and pristine as a brand new part. Next up, we've got the rusty footboards. The damage was extensive and clearly visible on both sides, but Tim had the perfect solution for it. He'd draw and cut out the shapes from a checkerboard from another project, and then he'd install them right back in. Sounds easy, right? Well, let's hope the process is just as easy. The checkerboard was so strong it made the jigsaw blade blunt, but in the end, the steel plates fit like gloves. Next, Tim turned his focus to the front fork. Of course, the first line of action was to disassemble it, but right after he was done, he brought out the buffer and polishing kit and gave them a good polish. It's an incredible transformation, but as a perfectionist, Tim decides to give it a sleek hand finish. Nice and shiny to the excitement of Tim. But for the umpteenth time in the restoration, Tim's excitement was cut short. Why? Well, he realized one of the forks had a damaged seal, but that isn't even much of a problem. The real problem here is that this is a custom bike, and Tim doesn't know what type of fork was used, so he really couldn't work out the dimension of the seal that is required to stop the leakage. The only way to fix this is to remove the circlip and retrieve the old fork seal using a clamp. But even then, he would have to hope that the seal doesn't fly out across the workshop, because it's going to be really difficult to find it. Tim decides he's going to give it a try anyway. The circlip is out, but there's still a bit of work to be done before the fork seal is retrieved. Whoops! That was close? Tim almost got his eyes destroyed there, but He just casually laughs it off and continues to hunt for the fork seal. Still no sign of the fork seal at this point, but even worse, the fork components refuse to separate. After some smart work and precise application of penetrating oil, the stubborn fork eventually gave way, and out came the seal. Tim ordered new sets of seals, and once they arrived, it was time to fix up the fork. Once the fork was sorted, he used a vacuum gauge to pressurize the lever. After 40 minutes of hard pumping, there were slight signs of improvement, but it wasn't enough to get the brake working. So Tim decided to try the reverse bleeding method, using a syringe, and after 5 long hours of hard work, he was able to bleed all the air out of the system. The front brake was good to go now, but the rear brake was binding slightly. But Tim thinks it's nothing to worry about. Moving on, he had a quick look at the rebuilt exhaust before turning his attention to the fuel tank and the fenders. Unfortunately, the painting gun developed a problem midway into the process, but trust Tim to come up with a solution. He unclogged the painting gun and resumed proceedings like he never even stopped. With the priming done and sorted, these components were ready for painting. But Tim had other ideas. It was April and the sun was becoming more frequent, which is kind of a rare sight in England. So Tim literally just abandons the restoration to soak up the sun for 2 whole months. But later in June, he decides, oh well, why don't I get back to work? So he smoothened and primed the surface of the components again, and it was time to give them the most transformative makeover of their lives. Other than a few minor glitches on the fender, mudguard, and fuel tank, the paint job was decent. But like I said, those are tiny bits of errors that can only be spotted by trained eyes. Anyway, with the paint job now done and sorted, it was time to patch up and reassemble other components. The rear seat is now all set and ready to accommodate passengers again. But remember those minor blemishes on the fender, mudguard, and fuel tank? Tim decides to have a go at them again, and this time the result is flawless. Next up, he replaced the damaged front seat and tested the horn in the presence of his mother. Then he fixed the clustered wiring setup and installed other practical and aesthetic accessories, including fancy indicator lights, side mirrors, skull heads, and crossbones. Now let's pause for a second and explore the motorcycle. Actually, since this is a custom bike, it's difficult to trace its history, but its K100 engine, on the other hand, is an iconic machinery backed by decades of history. Nicknamed the Flying Brick, this powertrain was launched way back in the 1980s. And despite its old lungs, it is the perfect fit for powerful mod bikes like this one, due to its unique design and high reliability. For the first time in years, this beast of a motorcycle will finally get to see the sun. But will it roar back to life? Well, it's done so once. Let's see if it will do it again. This sight is absolutely stunning. It's super clean and almost unrecognizable compared to the rickety and battered bike you saw a few moments ago. With every passing second, we were inching closer to the big reveal. But Tim decides to throw in some last-minute touch-ups, further adding more suspense to the restoration. Just take a look at that sticker. It's drop-dead gorgeous, and needless to say, I absolutely loved it. But there isn't much time to admire because there are still a few more on the way. This BMW Trike motorcycle is ready to roar again. And Tim? Well, he was keen to get the first ride after 9 months of hard work. So he hopped on the bike, and off he went into the distance like a kid who's exploring his newest toy. Speaking about kids, Tim had a few of them on board for a second ride, and I am sure they enjoyed it just as I did. What do you think of this restoration? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to watch our other videos to enjoy more incredible restorations like this one.